Many collect the US, and even more have US airmail stamps in their collection. However, in my opinion, the more common stuff is much more fascinating than the never to be owned by the average collector stamps such as the inverted Jenny. So, let's do them justice and talk about US airmail issues on this episode of Feature Philately. Official US airmail stamps were first issued in 1918, featuring the Curtiss Jenny biplane, represented by Scott catalog numbers C1, C2, and C3. However, that was not their chronological order of issue. The rates didn't increase but instead decreased over time, so they're technically in the wrong order in the Scott and other catalogs. The first US airmail trip was on May 15th, 1918. Everyone was excited to witness this historical occasion. Even President Woodrow Wilson was there to see Army Second Lieutenant George L. Boyle take off for the inaugural airmail flight from Washington, D.C. to New York. However, things would go wrong very quickly. Right after he took off, Boyle got lost by following the wrong train tracks that led out of the city. While attempting to land in order to figure out where he was, he broke the propeller on his airplane, rendering his aircraft useless. The mail he was supposed to carry ended up being trucked back to DC. As most of you may know, mistakes weren't only made during the flights, but also during the stamp creation process. One sheet of the C3 stamps would end up misprinted, and it became a very well-known stamp error that is now sold for a lot of money. Despite its many problems, airmail was very popular amongst the financial and commercial industries since it allowed important mail to be sent across the US at unprecedented speeds. In 1923, the second set of airmail stamps was issued. Scott numbers C4, C5, and C6 featured a radiator and propeller, the Air Service emblem, and a de Havilland biplane, which began to be used alongside the Curtiss Jenny. As the service expanded and now operated in 3 zones, it faced new challenges. Before, pilots were only flying during daytime, and at night, the mail was moved by train. This changed, however, and they also began flying at night, which was anything but safe. Many pilots died and strikes began, calling for the USPOD to cancel scheduled flights when the weather was too bad. Between 1926 and 1927, 4 more stamps were issued. The C7, C8, and C9 showed a map of the United States and 2 of the aforementioned de Havilland biplanes. The US government was looking to withdraw from the airmail business, and contract airmail service began. The 4th stamp issue was a very important one, and it played a huge part in the development of international airmail. It's the 1927 Lindberg's Spirit of St. Louis stamp. There was a $25,000 cash prize offered by New York hotel owner Raymond Orteig for the completion of the first non-stop solo flight between New York and Paris. Charles Lindberg was already experienced, having worked as an airmail pilot for contract airmail. And so, with funding from investors to acquire the Spirit of St. Louis, he took off flying for 33.5 hours across the Atlantic. The many challenges he faced, such as storms, his plane freezing in low temperatures, as well as passing out from exhaustion multiple times, but still landing safely and being able to tail the tail, brought the Lindbergh boom, and interest in aviation skyrocketed. However, the same can't be said for airmail, which was experiencing financial difficulties due to low demand. In 1928, the C-11 had a reduced rate of 5 cents to further encourage the usage of airmail stamps, which were now exclusively used for that service, and not for regular mail anymore. The design was complicated and costly to produce, but that was done so that the stamp would be eye-catching. Furthermore, the selvage includes the word top. which was printed in order to prevent an invert mistake like the one mentioned earlier. The C-11 features a beacon that was on Sherman Hill in Wyoming. Pilots would use such landmarks to not get lost at night. I'd like to also know what this cancel is, if anyone knows. It looks very interesting, however I couldn't find much about it online. Eventually, the C-11 was replaced by the winged globe issues, C-12, C-16, C-17, and C-19. The design is the wing insignia of the brave pilots who flew night and day to carry airmail. There are also two 5-cent winged globe stamps, and the difference between them is the printing process. One used a flat press and the other a rotary press. The switch from flat to rotary was made because rotary was faster and more efficient. Up next are the Zeppelin issues. They technically came before the winged globe issues. I just decided to talk about the latter first because they were replacements for the C-11. These are again very well known but expensive stamps for the average collector, and in my opinion they deserve their own video just because of how much history they have compared to the other issues we're looking at today. Long story short, the US acquired a Zeppelin of their own after World War I from Luftschiffbau Zeppelin, which had manufactured military Zeppelins for Germany. The company made one for the US, and in exchange, their war reparations debt from World War I was forgiven. However, one stipulation the US imposed on the company was that it had to complete a transatlantic delivery, which carried some 55,714 pieces of mail, many of which are now expensive postal history. For those who found those 3 stamps interesting but can't afford them, I do have good news for you, in the form of the Century of Progress stamp. It costs way less than the Graf Zeppelin set and has a lot of history as well. That same airship that the US acquired flew many more times before it retired in 1940. One of those flights was to the Century of Progress World's Fair in Chicago. It crossed the Atlantic to South America, Miami, and Akron, before finally arriving at the fair. In the mid to late 1930s, airmail service continued to expand, giving rise to the China Clipper set. These higher rate stamps were specifically designated for mail routes from San Francisco to Hawaii, Midway, Wake, Guam, and the Philippines. During this period, a significant technological shift occurred. Within a decade, airplanes evolved from wooden fabric construction to much more durable metal airframes. Despite the challenges posed by the vast ocean routes and limited airstrips, especially on remote islands, the China Clipper was developed as a solution, essentially functioning as a flying boat. With airmail being widely used for international letters, lower rate stamps for domestic use continued to be issued, which brings us to the 1938 C-23 stamp, known as the Airmail Eagle. This stamp commemorated the 20th anniversary of the first US government airmail flight. President Roosevelt, who was also a philatelist, personally sketched the design that is now featured on the stamp. As part of the celebration for this new issue, he received hundreds of covers bearing his stamp from every corner of the United States. As we reached the end of the 30s, we also saw a decline in notable stamp issues. The last major one was the transatlantic winged globe released in 1939. Similar in design to the earlier stamps issued between 1930 and 1934, C-24 commemorates the first official American transatlantic airmail service. However, the American government was far from being the first to cross the Atlantic. The British would be the first to cross it, with other European nations like France and Germany following suit, eventually establishing their own airmail lines across the ocean. While the US continued to issue airmail stamps well after the 1930s, the issues are self-explanatory, if they even commemorate anything at all, since most are just definitives that feature various aircraft, buildings, or more odd designs. Airmail would stop being a special class of USPS postage on October 10, 1975, when all letters and packages within the US started being sent by air, as long as it was faster and practical at the regular postage rate. So, that's a wrap on US airmail postage from 1918 up until the 1940s. However, before we end this video, I wanted to briefly mention that I've made some pages which are available in the description of this video down below for free. Check them out, let me know what you think, please like and subscribe. My name is Michael and this was a Feature Philately video. Thank you.